I never imagined an ordinary morning could leave me so exposed, so vulnerable, and yet reveal the humanity hidden within strange passengers. That old bus creaked at every turn. The engine coughed, as if complaining of years of service, and the light rain began to beat against the window in small, irregular drizzles, as if each drop had a rush I didn't share. I stood there, my veteran's uniform tucked away in the closet for decades. A discreet medal pinned to the front of my coat, almost invisible but carrying stories that could shame any ignorance. As I walked through the terminal, my hands trembled progressively, not from the cold, but from the invisible weight of the past that still insisted on manifesting itself at unexpected moments. There was something in the way the driver looked at me, a mixture of impatience and disdain, that made me realize immediately that this day would not be like the others. The smell of burning tires and old engine oil filled the air, mingling with the fumes of cheap coffee someone had spilled on the wet ground. Each step I took toward the bus door seemed to deepen the silence, as if all the world's children were withdrawing to watch what would happen next. I paused for a moment, adjusting my coat, taking a deep breath, trying not to let the past invade the present. But the past never waits. It was there, throbbing, like a wound that insisted on opening at the most inopportune moment. And then, with an impatient gesture and a look of judgment, the driver closed the door in front of me without even giving me a chance. I felt the impact of the contempt like a slap in the face. A cruel reminder that sometimes the uniform doesn't protect, and age doesn't inspire respect. What happened next took me by surprise. Looking inside the bus, I saw eyes that avoided contact, heads lowered, and prolonged silences. Some whispered, others just stared at the ground. I stood there, standing in the light rain, feeling every drop as a reminder of what I'd been through, what I'd survived, and what I still expected of myself. It wasn't just the driver's refusal, it was the echo of all the times I'd been ignored, underestimated, invisible to the eyes of those who never cared about stories that didn't fit into their everyday reality. But there was something more in that scene, a palpable tension that went beyond simple contempt. It was the expectation of a response, the exact moment when the invisible could become visible, and the story of a man marked by war and sacrifice could finally reverberate in the hearts of those who had only looked judged and ignored him. I felt the cold wind cut through my wet clothes, as if the weather itself conspired to remind me that, though vulnerable, I was still standing. And then, the bus door, closed with a sharp click, no longer felt like just a physical barrier, but a symbol of all the doors life had closed before me. All the times I'd been invisible, disrespected, and underestimated. The rain fell harder now, mingling with the morning chill, and reality set in. This wasn't just a bus. This was a stage, and I was the star, even if I hadn't been invited. Each drop that trailed down my face carried memories of battles, lost friends, sleepless nights, and courage no one had ever known. And yet, there I stood, ignored, waiting to see if the humanity still remaining in the strange passengers would awaken, or if I would remain just another old man forgotten in the rain. My name is John, and though today my steps are slow and my muscles ache from decades of battle, my mind never forgets. I grew up in a small American town, where every face was familiar, every street told stories spanning generations. Before serving, I worked as a mechanic, and on hot summer afternoons I could hear the distant sound of planes cutting through the blue sky. Back then, life seemed simple, but the world had other plans, and simplicity was ripped from us like leaves in the wind. When war called me, I was only 20 years old. I entered without great expectations, but with a heart full of courage, albeit inexperienced. The training was brutal, a constant test of physical and mental strength. But I quickly learned that survival depended on unity and discipline. I saw childhood friends become brothers, facing together the fear no one could comprehend from the outside. Every mission was a calculated risk, every night a fight against not only the enemy, but also the internal fear that threatened to paralyze us. I remember the muddy trenches, the bone-piercing cold, the explosions that shook the ground as if the world were in a rage. I saw friends fall before my eyes, some without even having time to say goodbye. Each death left a permanent echo within me, an invisible scar that no one could see, but which I carried with every step I took. And yet, there were moments of humanity, a shared ration, a smile amidst the chaos, the camaraderie that made the unbearable bearable. I learned that true courage is not just facing the enemy, but continuing to live after everything you've witnessed. Returning home, reality felt strange, almost surreal. People looked at me with superficial respect, but no one truly understood. The medals I received gleamed in the light, but they were merely symbols of memories no one could share. The civilian world can never replicate the deafening sound of a battle, nor the heavy silence of a friend who never returned. I spent years trying to adjust, working in small workshops, helping neighbors, and learning to smile again, even when sadness threatened to engulf me. Over time, I grew older, but I never forgot. Every wrinkle on my face tells a story, every trembling hand a reminder of sleepless nights and decisions I carried on my shoulders. And yet, there's a quiet pride that never fades, a strength that remains even when my body weakens. Today, as I walk to that bus, I'm not just going from point A to point B. I'm traversing years of experiences, traumas, memories of lost comrades, and the very courage that keeps me standing. Being at that bus stop was more than just a morning commute. It was a silent test, a confrontation with a world that often ignores those who gave everything to protect something greater. Every step I took there carried the weight of past battles, of cold nights in the desert, of screams muffled by explosions, of hands that held each other silently to keep fear from winning. I wasn't seeking recognition, but I also wasn't expecting contempt. After all, war teaches us that true worth doesn't depend on the gaze of others, but on how we face the reflection of our own conscience. Even now, standing in front of that bus, feeling the suspicious stares and the door closing before me, I can clearly hear the voices of the past. They remind me of the courage, resilience, and commitment I made to my brothers in arms. Civilian life might be hard, it might be unfair, but my history, my honor, remain intact. Each drop of rain that ran down my face seemed to wash away some of the pain, but it also reinforced the reminder that every emotional scar is also a seal of survival. And then, standing there, I understood something essential. I am not just an elderly man trying to board a bus. I am a veteran carrying decades of sacrifice, memories that shaped my character, and a courage that time will never erase. What would happen next to that driver or the passengers would be just another chapter. But the story I carry inside me is eternal, and no one could ever deny it. As I walked toward the bus door, the feeling of tension grew with each step. I heard the engine breathing, the creak of the ancient springs, and the metallic sound of the windshield wipers cutting through the rain. But none of this compared to the disconcerting sensation of being invisible to the driver. He didn't look at me, nor did he hesitate. It was as if I were just another object in the world, worthless, without history, with no right to be noticed. I reached the door, clutching my wet coat tightly, trying to maintain my composure. My heart beat faster, not from fear but from silent indignation. "Please, sir, may I board?" I asked, my voice firm but charged with years of experience that no one on that street could comprehend. The driver, a man apparently in his 40s, just snorted, looking away and closing the door with a sharp, almost mocking click. I felt a shock run down my spine, the same sensation I'd felt years ago when friends were underestimated by incompetent superiors, when every act of contempt was a silent test of character. I glanced at the passengers, trying to find some sign of understanding, but many were absorbed in their phones. Others looked away as if unwilling to engage. I could hear whispers, low chuckles, the muffled sound of judgment hanging in the air. Every silent chuckle, every look of disdain, was a cruel reminder that age and experience sometimes become invisible in the face of superficiality and everyday selfishness. I, who had faced wars, who had witnessed the loss of brothers in distant fields, was now treated as a nuisance, an obstacle to someone's daily routine. The humiliation was palpable. I felt the chill of the rain seep into my bones, mixed with the bitter sense of injustice. Memories of combat, of sleepless nights, of decisions that cost lives, inevitably surfaced. Every muffled scream, every explosion, every silent embrace given to a fallen friend seemed to echo in that moment of public contempt. The feeling was suffocating, but it also sparked a spark of determination. I took a deep breath, trying to control the anger that threatened to surface. It was a different anger than the one I felt on the battlefield. Now it was silent, contained, but powerful. I knew that any hasty reaction would only fuel the disrespect. I needed to find another path, a way to transform that moment of humiliation into something that would bring the truth to light. The initial conflict was not just physical, but emotional. I faced injustice, pure and simple. Being ignored, disrespected, invisible. But war taught me that courage manifests itself in many forms, and not always in direct confrontation. Sometimes the greatest battle is to endure contempt, keeping one's dignity intact while waiting for the right moment for the truth to be revealed. As the rain ran down my face and the driver remained indifferent, I noticed something curious. The passengers began to notice. Small signs, exchanged glances, nervous smiles, intensifying murmurs. Something was changing. The initial conflict, that moment of rejection and utter disregard, was the catalyst for something greater, a silent test of the conscience of those around me. I couldn't let it go unnoticed, but I also didn't need to raise my voice. The story he carried would be enough to make itself known, in a way no one could ignore. And it was in that moment, standing before the closed door, that I felt the tension reach its peak. The bus, the driver, the passengers, the light rain, everything conspired to transform that simple moment into a test of collective character. I, an elderly veteran with trembling hands but a firm heart, knew something was about to happen. Something unexpected, something that would change everyone's perception. The initial conflict was just the beginning, the first blow of a story that needed to be told, and that would finally find an echo in those who were about to realize that sometimes the invisible heroes are still standing, waiting to be recognized. Aviso: segue as características dos personagens. Resumo máximo dos personagens e funções. 1. John Mitchell, veterano, protagonista. 72 anos, cabelo grisalho, barba por fazer, roupa simples e medalha escondida. Orgulhoso, honrado e emocionalmente contido. Veterano do Vietnã, Iraque, carrega traumas e respeito profundo pela bandeira americana. Função: símbolo de dignidade e sacrifício. 2. Tom Reynolds, motorista, antagonista inicial. 45 anos, rosto cansado, uniforme de motorista, impaciente, rígido, frio, sem empatia. Função: representa o desprezo e a humilhação que o veterano enfrenta antes da reviravolta. 3. Emily Carter, jovem interventora, 24 anos, cabelo castanho, olhar firme, corajosa, empática e justa. Função: primeira a defender o veterano, inicia a mudança de todos. 4. Robert Hayes, homem idoso, aliado, 68 anos, grisalho, óculos, calmo e sábio. Função: reforça o respeito ao veterano e dá peso moral à cena. 5. Jake Thompson, jovem zombador, 19 anos, boné, camisa esportiva, imaturo e zombeteiro no início, mas se arrepende. Função: mostra a transformação e aprendizado moral. 6. Sarah Lewis, mãe com criança, 32 anos, aparência simples, segura o filho no colo, empática e observadora. Função: representa o olhar humano e a pressão moral coletiva. 7. Passageiros secundários, grupo diverso de idades e perfis. Função: criam o clima de desprezo inicial e a virada moral no final. The bus door remained closed, and I felt an almost physical weight on my shoulders, as if every year I'd lived, every battle I'd faced, every invisible scar had turned into stones that prevented me from moving forward. The driver, now with his arms crossed, looked at me with that silent contempt that cuts deeper than any insult. "Come on, sir, time waits for you," he said in a hard, almost harsh voice, full of impatience and arrogance. That phrase was more than a simple command. It was a judgment, a silent sentence telling me I was worthless, that my life and my stories were irrelevant compared to the routine of his day. I felt shame and humiliation wash over me unexpectedly. I looked around, searching for some sign of empathy among the passengers, but most looked away, as if unwilling to get involved. Some whispered, others let out low, quick laughs, trying to appear discreet, but they felt like daggers in my heart. A boy, probably 16 or 17, pointed at me, and muttered something I heard perfectly. "Why doesn't he even come in? He looks too old to be here." The sound of his words seemed to echo, heightening every feeling of rejection, every memory of a youth lost to wars and decisions no one would ever understand. The light rain that fell seemed to intensify the feeling of exposure. Each drop that ran down my face brought with it memories of worse days, when survival depended on courage, not on a stranger's permission. I felt my muscles contract involuntarily, my heart racing, not with fear but with silent indignation. Never before had I felt so disrespected, so invisible, so reduced to a nuisance, a weight in the world that suddenly seemed incapable of recognizing value in anything other than the immediate, superficial and visible. The driver seemed to revel in the power he wielded in that moment. His every gesture, every cold look, every heavy breath conveyed contempt. I could feel the heat of humiliation rising in my face, and yet I held my ground, breathing deeply, remembering every battle I'd faced, every moment when courage was more necessary than weakness. But even so, the feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. Every giggle, every whisper, every averted glance was an invisible blade that cut deeper than any physical wound I'd ever endured. An older passenger sitting near the window glanced at me with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, but did nothing. It was as if everyone was waiting for a reaction from me, an outburst that would justify the ridicule they were witnessing. The humiliation was not only public, but profound, psychological. I felt my body tremble slightly, my hands clench into discreet fists, and my chest fill with a mixture of suppressed rage and sadness. I remembered battlefields, ignored orders, fallen colleagues, and realized that war was not just physical, but also social. Being ignored, disrespected, and underestimated was a daily struggle that many would never understand. The muffled sound of laughter and whispers continued, and the feeling of invisibility grew stronger by the second. Passengers began exchanging glances, some embarrassed, others curious. It was a silent, almost palpable tension, as if the air around me had constricted, making every movement more difficult, every breath heavier. I felt the need to remain calm, but indignation grew, burning within me like a fire I could not extinguish. I was faced with an obstacle that could not be removed with physical force or shouting. It needed to be something greater, something unexpected, that would show everyone that dignity does not depend on immediate recognition, but on the truth I carry within. The humiliation reached its peak when a mother with a small child approached the driver, casually asking why I could not get on. He responded sarcastically, ignoring my presence and reinforcing his contempt. The sound of the rain, the roar of the engine, the murmurs of the passengers, everything blended into a seemingly endless symphony of disrespect. But in that moment, I realized that every second of humiliation was building to something greater. Every gesture of contempt, every hidden chuckle, every undertone, was fuel for the coming turnaround. I could feel the weight of past and present colliding in that instant. Every invisible scar, every memory of courage, every act of sacrifice was silently manifesting within me, paving the way for something unexpected. As I stood there standing before the closed door, feeling the humiliation that seemed endless, something began to happen. A murmur began to spread through the bus, barely audible at first, but growing louder. The passengers began exchanging glances, some confused, others curious, as if they had sensed something they had ignored until that moment. I didn't understand it immediately, but I felt a slight chill, a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt since my days of military training, when every signal could mean the difference between life and death. It was then that a young woman sitting near the front of the bus stood up abruptly. She looked at me with a mixture of determination and respect that made me realize something was about to change. "Wait, sir. He's a veteran. He has the right to enter." Her voice, firm and resolute, cut through the sound of the engine and the chatter of the passengers. The driver, surprised, opened his mouth but said nothing, the shock visible in his eyes betraying that he hadn't expected such an intervention. Those words, simple yet powerful, reverberated through the space like a flash of justice, awakening something in the hearts of those present. Then, one by one, other passengers began to stand. An older man approached and said, "You fought for all of us, man. Come in." A collective feeling seemed to spread like a silent wave. It was the same feeling I had felt during the war, when comrades supported each other in impossible moments, when every act of courage was silently recognized by those who shared the same burden. Respect finally emerged not from force, but from understanding. The driver stepped back, clearly speechless. The bus door opened, this time without resistance, and I took the first step inside, feeling the gaze of all the passengers upon me. But it wasn't just a look of curiosity or judgment. It was recognition. It was silent admiration. The laughter and whispers had ceased. In their place, a palpable sense of respect filled the air, almost as if the light rain had become a veil of purification over the scene. As I walked down the bus aisle, I noticed my medal, previously discreet and nearly invisible, begin to shine in the gray morning light. I remembered every moment of courage it symbolized, every battle faced, every lost friend, every silent sacrifice. Everything that had been ignored for so long finally had a voice, finally had form, finally was recognized. A feeling of gratitude mixed with relief began to grow within me. The turnaround didn't come from me, didn't come from my direct intervention, but from the collective recognition of the truth I carried. I was more than an elderly man trying to board a bus. I was a veteran, a man who had faced the worst of humanity and survived, and who was now, finally, seen as such. As I sat down, I noticed that each passenger seemed more attentive, more aware of what they were witnessing. Some whispered to each other, exchanging expressions of surprise and reflection. There was something transformative in that moment. something that transcended the simple act of allowing me to board the bus. It was a reminder that respect and dignity are earned not just by age or appearance, but by quiet courage and the undeniable truth of a life lived with honor. And then, something unexpected happened. One of the younger passengers, who had initially mocked me, approached and said sincerely, "Sorry, sir. I didn't know. Thank you for what you did for us." Those words, spoken with honesty and vulnerability, penetrated deeply into my heart. I realized that the turning point wasn't just about me, but about all those who were there, witnessing, learning, and transforming in that brief moment of empathy and recognition. In that moment, I understood that life always offers the chance to turn the tide, to transform contempt into respect, ignorance into understanding. The turning point in this case was silent, almost invisible at first, but powerful, lasting, and emotionally overwhelming. I got on that bus like an ignored veteran and left, even without physically leaving yet, with the certainty that I had lit a spark of conscience in each of those present. As soon as I sat down on the bus, I noticed something transformative in the air. It wasn't just a respectful silence, but an almost palpable shift in the energy of everyone around me. Every passenger who had previously looked away now watched me with genuine attention, as if trying to comprehend the story I silently carried. The driver, previously impassive and rude, seemed incapable of articulating a response, as if he had finally understood that authority and contempt could not prevail in the face of such a profound and undeniable truth. The older man sitting across from me smiled quietly and said, "Never underestimate someone who has faced life head-on. Today, you remind us what true courage means." Those words, simple and sincere, reverberated in my heart. I felt a mixture of relief, pride, and an emotion I hadn't experienced in a long time. The recognition, contrary to what many imagine, didn't come from medals or titles, but from the silent understanding that my life had meaning, that my efforts and sacrifices were not in vain. I looked around and noticed small gestures of respect spreading. Passengers began to give up their seats with smiles, others inclined their heads in recognition. It was as if each gesture slowly told the story of dignity I had carried within me for decades. Each silent action cemented a justice that had been denied for so long, transforming a moment of humiliation into a silent but powerful victory. The driver finally spoke, his voice thick with a mixture of embarrassment and reverence. "I apologize, sir. I had no idea. Thank you for what you did for us." I simply nodded, maintaining my composure. But internally, I felt a wave of emotion course through me. Justice didn't have to be blatant or theatrical. Sometimes it was just simple acknowledgement, the silent acceptance that the truth, however ignored, cannot be denied forever. The passengers, now aware of the situation, began to talk among themselves about courage, sacrifice, and respect. Some shared stories of family members who had also served. Others reflected on what it meant to value those who dedicated their lives to protecting others. Each silent exchange or murmur of understanding was like a small flame of justice lit in that space, illuminating the path of empathy and recognition. As the city passed by the bus window, with its gray buildings and rain-slicked streets, I felt a profound sense of completeness. It wasn't just about me being recognized, it was about the impact a life lived with honor can have on others, about how quiet courage inspires respect, even in everyday and unexpected situations. I realized that true justice doesn't need courts or applause, but emerges when those who ignore it finally realize the truth that has been right before their eyes all along. The words of gratitude continued to come, whispered by passengers who had previously mocked or ignored us. "Thank you, sir, for everything you did. We're sorry, we didn't know." Each sentence was a brick building the bridge between the initial injustice and the deserved respect, connecting past and present in a single moment of recognition. I felt, tangibly, that the dignity that had been disrespected had been restored, not immediately or simply, but profoundly and lastingly. As the bus continued its journey, the rain gradually ceased and the shy sun began to peek through the clouds. The metaphor did not go unnoticed. Just as the rain finally gave way to light, contempt gave way to recognition. Every look, every gesture, every silent word was proof that justice, however delayed, could prevail. I, an elderly veteran, experienced in battles no civilian could comprehend, finally felt the quiet satisfaction of having my history and my honor recognized. In that moment, I realized something even more important. Justice lay not only in the acceptance of others, but in the very knowledge that I had remained true to my principles, my courage, and my dignity. External recognition was a natural consequence of a life lived with honor. And as the bus moved forward, carrying us all through the wet city, I felt that silent victory become a living lesson, not just for me but for everyone who witnessed the scene. As I settled into my bus seat, still feeling the quiet warmth of newfound respect, my thoughts began to drift deep into memories of the past. Those no one could see but that shaped every fiber of my being. My mind instantly traveled to the battlefields, to the cold, silent nights where only the sound of cautious footsteps, distant explosions, and the murmurs of comrades kept my consciousness company. Each memory was vivid, laden with the smell of gunpowder, soaked mud, sweat, and fear, but also with camaraderie and courage. The kind of courage only known when everyone's life depended on your instant decision. I remembered the smell of smoke in the first days of combat, the chill that pierced my body even through thick coats, the constant adrenaline that kept my heart racing. I saw again the faces of fallen friends, their names etched in my memory like invisible tattoos, memories that would stay with me for the rest of my life. Each of them had a story, a family, dreams cut short, and I, somehow, survived. Gratitude for being alive mingled with silent guilt, the guilt of those who lived while others didn't have that chance. Now, sitting on that bus, looking at the passengers around me who were finally showing understanding and respect, I realized that the battles I faced weren't limited to external wars. Every daily humiliation, every gesture of disdain, every door closed before me was like a silent battlefield, testing my patience, my dignity, and my ability to maintain courage even in the face of injustice. I understood in that moment that true strength lies not only in the ability to face physical danger, but also in the ability to remain whole when the world ignores or underestimates you. The recognition I received wasn't just external. It reverberated within me in a way that filled spaces previously empty. I felt deeply that all those war experiences, all the pain, loss, and sacrifice, had shaped the person I was now. Resilient, patient, and still capable of taking pride in my history. Every gesture of respect, every look of silent admiration was a bridge between my past and present, connecting memories of battles and lost comrades with the moment when I was finally seen as worthy and honored. The silence inside the bus became almost meditative. Each passenger seemed to absorb something greater, something that transcended that simple journey. The importance of valuing those who came before, of recognizing stories hidden beneath the veil of routine and indifference. And I, despite all the weight I carried, felt an unexpected calm, as if part of the burden I had carried for so many years had finally found rest. Not because the scars had disappeared, but because they were understood, acknowledged, and respected. As I watched the city pass by through the window, I felt the contrast between external life and my internal world. The wet streets, the hurried cars, the people wrapped up in their own lives. Everything seemed insignificant compared to the emotional impact of that moment. I allowed myself to feel pride, gratitude, and even a touch of quiet joy. Every memory of war, every pain faced, every act of courage now had an echo, a recognition that transcended the barriers of time and the disdain of others. And then, I realized something essential. My journey wasn't just my own. Every lesson, every memory, every emotional scar was an invitation for others to understand the true meaning of courage, dignity, and sacrifice. I was a veteran, yes, but also a silent messenger, reminding everyone that often heroes are not celebrated, but are present, patiently waiting for the moment when their stories will finally be recognized. I felt a tightness in my chest, a mixture of longing, sadness, and relief. Life has taught me that time doesn't erase memories, but offers us opportunities for emotional reconciliation. Every gesture of respect on that bus, every attentive look, and every word of recognition not only restored my dignity, but also confirmed that my story, even silent for so long, could still touch hearts and change perceptions. As the city continued to pass by and the rain finally stopped, I felt at peace, knowing that the courage and sacrifice that defined my life were not invisible. They were there, reflected in the eyes of those who finally saw, understood, and acknowledged the truth I had carried within me for so long. And in that moment, I realized that the deepest emotional connection is not just about the past we lived, but about its impact on the present, on those who witness and learn, silently and eternally. I'd barely begun to breathe a sigh of relief, feeling recognition and respect surge around me, when I realized the tension wasn't over yet. The driver, visibly embarrassed, began mumbling something about the schedule, the routine, and rules that, at that moment, seemed trivial compared to the gravity of the moment. But I knew it wasn't just about rules. It was about misplaced authority, wounded pride, someone still reluctant to admit they'd made a mistake and underestimated an elderly veteran. His every word, every impatient gesture, felt like a silent test of my patience and emotional control. As I listened, I felt a pang of anger that I immediately tried to suppress. It wasn't anger of retaliation, but of frustration, of the injustice that still lingered in the air even after the passenger's intervention. I could feel the nervous glances of some, the discomfort of others, as if everyone was aware that this moment could become even more intense. The sensation was akin to a battlefield. The apparent calm hid the imminent confrontation that demanded precision, strategy, and self-control. It was then that a younger passenger, who had initially mocked me and joined in the silent contempt, stood up, hesitant but determined. "Sir, I think he needs to understand that respect isn't optional. You deserve to be here, just as we all deserve to learn to recognize courage." That simple act, charged with moral courage, created an immediate shift in the energy of the bus. I felt the tension rise, but in a different way. Now, the confrontation wasn't just between me and the driver, but between injustice and the collective conscience that was beginning to manifest itself inevitably. The driver huffed, tightening his hands on the steering wheel, trying to regain some sense of control, but the atmosphere had completely changed. I looked at him directly, keeping my gaze steady but without hostility. With each passing second, his every gesture seemed to widen, and the responsibility for what was happening weighed heavily on his shoulders. I didn't need to say anything. My presence, my posture, and the silence, steeped in experience, already said more than any words could express. As the tension reached its peak, I felt a surge of energy course through the passengers. Some stood, others began to intervene in firm but respectful voices. "He's a veteran. Respect his history. This isn't right." The collective pressure was palpable, almost physical, and I felt my heart beat faster, not with fear, but with anticipation. The situation had become a decisive moment, a test of the morality and courage of every person present, including my own. I knew the turnaround was not yet complete, that justice still needed to be asserted in the face of the final resistance. Every murmur, every word of encouragement to the passengers, every glance directed at the driver heightened the tension, making the moment almost unbearable. I could feel the past and present colliding within me. Memories of battle and loss intertwined with the present situation, forming an emotional knot almost impossible to untangle. And then, an unexpected event further intensified the climax. A passenger leaned out of the bus, discreetly pointing to the medal I carried on my coat, now visible in the dim morning light. "Look at this. He's not here for himself. He served. He sacrificed. He deserves respect." The words spread like wildfire, and I felt the ultimate pressure hit everyone. The driver, the passengers, even myself, who now saw the culmination of years of patience, suffering, and courage manifesting in that moment. The silence that followed was almost deafening, charged with tension, anticipation, and emotion. All eyes were fixed on me, and I could feel the weight of the historic responsibility of that moment. Each beat of my heart resonated like the sound of a silent march, reminding me that, though old and weary, I still possessed the strength and dignity to face any test. The climax had been reached. The maximum tension, the blatant injustice, the previous humiliation, all converged in an instant of collective moral decision. And in that instant, I realized that resolution wouldn't depend on my strength or eloquent words. The truth I held, the life I lived, and the example of courage I represented would become inevitable. The climax was the pinnacle, the moment when justice, respect, and humanity finally had the chance to emerge irrevocably, shaping not only the perception of those around me, but also reaffirming my own sense of dignity and purpose. When I finally settled into my seat, tension still pulsing through my veins, I felt a strange sense of relief and completeness I hadn't experienced in a long time. That bus, which minutes before had represented contempt and humiliation, had now become a stage for justice, recognition, and silent change. The atmosphere had completely transformed. The passengers, previously indifferent or mocking, now displayed genuine respect in their glances, small gestures, discreet smiles, and words that sounded almost like silent apologies. As I gazed out the rain-fogged window, I realized the city continued its indifferent pace. Cars hustling, people rushing to their appointments, and yet, within that confined space, something had profoundly changed. The experience of that moment had not only restored my dignity, but also left a mark on those who witnessed my presence. It was as if every gesture, every look, every silent word was a reminder that respect and empathy can emerge even in the most unexpected places, when courage and truth speak with steadfastness. Reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized that that morning had become an extension of the battles I faced throughout my life. Every humiliation, every slight, every moment of rejection I endured was a silent practice, preparing me for moments like that, when patience and dignity were my most powerful weapons. I didn't need to raise my voice or directly confront the driver aggressively. Life and my experiences had spoken for me, and now recognition arose naturally, an inevitable consequence of the truth I carried within me. The feeling of justice and recognition also brought back memories of former comrades who sacrificed themselves with me in distant wars. I felt a mixture of gratitude and longing. Gratitude for being alive to witness that moment of respect, and longing for those who didn't have the same opportunity. The experience on the bus reinforced the importance of valuing every gesture of humanity, every act of courage, even when no one seems to notice. I learned, once again, that true dignity doesn't depend on everyone's approval, but rather on the firmness with which one upholds one's principles and life story. As the passengers continued to watch, some still exchanging hushed words of recognition, and others simply absorbing the respectful silence, I realized something even more profound. The experience had consequences that went beyond the moment. Those who witnessed me would change their perception of respect, empathy, and justice. Perhaps that day, someone would decide to act more humanely in future situations. Perhaps the silent memory of a veteran ignored and then recognized would remain as a lesson in their hearts. Each act of recognition had a multiplier effect, transforming a simple bus ride into a lasting moral experience. I felt my body slowly relax, though it still carried the fatigue and limitations of age. The emotional weight, which had previously seemed almost unbearable, transformed into a sense of peace. The experience reminded me that life goes on, but that each act of dignity and recognition creates effects that go beyond the immediate. Every gesture of respect I received on that bus became part of my own story, reinforcing the connection between my past experiences and how I am perceived in the present. As I looked back at the passengers, I noticed looks of admiration, understanding, and learning. Some began to talk about forgotten values, about respect for elders, about courage and sacrifice. It was as if the experience had sparked a small, silent revolution within that space where everyone could reflect on their own attitudes. I felt stronger, not because of their reaction, but because of the understanding that my story would not go unnoticed, that the impact of a life lived with honor is lasting, even if silent. As the bus rolled along, I felt that morning had changed something within me and others. A small, silent, yet powerful victory that reinforced the importance of persevering, of maintaining dignity, of acting courageously even in the face of contempt, and above all, that every gesture of recognition, no matter how simple, carries consequences that extend far beyond the moment in which it occurs, touching lives and leaving a mark that never fades. In that moment, I understood that justice and respect do not depend on expectations, but on the truth we carry within us and the courage to remain whole, even when the world insists on ignoring us. The outcome of that morning was not only a personal victory, but a silent lesson for everyone. Dignity, recognition, and humanity always find their way even in the most unexpected and appalling situations. As the bus wound its way through the wet streets and the city seemed to return to its indifferent routine, I felt the need to reflect deeply on everything that had happened that morning. Every moment of humiliation, every act of contempt, every gesture of recognition and justice now converged into a clear, almost palpable lesson that could not be ignored. I realized that life is made of these moments, these silent tests that challenge us to maintain dignity, empathy, and courage, even when no one seems to care or when the world insists on underestimating us. My story from ignored veteran to respected in a matter of minutes is a reminder that true greatness lies not only in the medals or titles we accumulate, but in how we face contempt, how we maintain our principles in the face of injustice, and how we remain true to ourselves. Every act of quiet courage, every choice of dignity amid disrespect, creates an impact that is often not immediate but inevitable, touching hearts and changing perspectives, even if no one realizes it at the time. Reflecting on what happened, I also felt the importance of recognizing the humanity in others, of not ignoring those who may seem fragile or insignificant at first glance. Too often, we judge without knowing someone's story, underestimating lives and experiences, forgetting that each person carries invisible struggles, painful memories, and acts of courage that shape their essence. The driver, the passengers, everyone was confronted with this truth that morning, and the lesson was clear. Respect and empathy are choices we can make, and each choice has the power to transform moments, lives, and consciousness. As I looked at the faces around me, I realized that every look that once carried indifference or mockery now reflected understanding, regret, or learning. Everyday life is full of these silent tests, small moments that seem trivial but have the potential to define character, teach courage, and reinforce core values. I learned that even when we feel invisible or disrespected, our history and dignity cannot be denied. The truth always finds a way to emerge, and recognition, however belated, always brings with it a deep and lasting sense of justice. The experience on that bus also reinforced the importance of sharing our stories, of not hiding in the face of contempt or ignorance. Every veteran, every person who has faced challenges, injustices, or moments of humiliation has the power to influence others simply by standing firm, by maintaining dignity, and by allowing the truth of their life to speak for itself. My courage was not measured by physical strength or direct confrontation, but by patience, integrity, and the silence that spoke louder than any words could express. And then I realized something even more profound. Morality is not just about me, but about everyone who witnessed the scene and those who can hear this story. It's an invitation to reflect on how we treat others, on how we perceive the value of life and the experiences of others, and on how small actions, like giving up a seat, listening, acknowledging, or respecting, can have powerful and lasting impacts. The lesson is clear: never underestimate anyone, never ignore those who have dedicated their lives to courage and sacrifice, and never doubt the power of a gesture of justice and recognition, no matter how small. As the bus moved forward, I felt a mixture of gratitude, relief, and renewed purpose. I knew that moment would stay with me forever, not just as a personal victory, but as a reminder that dignity, courage, and truth are invincible forces. The moral of the story is simple yet profound. Respect is an act of humanity. Justice can emerge in unexpected ways, and true courage is that which remains steadfast, silent in the face of contempt. And so, I close this chapter of my life with the conviction that, no matter how much the world tries to ignore or underestimate us, our stories carry weight, our experiences have value, and our principles are eternal. Life is a constant battleground, but each act of dignity and recognition leaves marks that last far beyond the moment, touching hearts and transforming lives. May everyone who watches this story understand: it's never too late to seek justice, never too late to recognize someone's worth, and we should never underestimate the silent strength of a veteran who, even invisible, remains standing.